Thinking will defrag your mind of propaganda-ridden viruses induced by mass media news programming. No BS here, just the facts.
And now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly.
Wow.
In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
Welcome, everyone, to Liberty Talk Radio, America's libertarian voice, broadcasting from our studio in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to around the world. I'm your host, Joe Cristiano, and this is your antidote to popular talk radio. Folks, it's time for us to take back control of our government now before this bureaucratic, oversized, and self-serving federal government starves us of our property, our freedom, our rights, and our liberty. But to do this, we must shed conventional thinking regarding our political structure. We need to be revolutionaries in thought, dissidents in action. Only after we recognize what our government is doing to our freedom and our Constitution will we start taking it back. And this program is just about that. Today we're pleased and honored to have Mr. Bart Frazier, Vice President of the Future of Freedom Foundation, to be on our show. Hopefully today he can educate us a little bit on government programs that give us the warm and fuzzy feeling, but in fact are quite destructive to society. Sounds counterintuitive, doesn't it? But unfortunately, it's true. Join us by calling out number 646-652-4620. That's 646-652-4620 during our live broadcast with your questions or comments. Please press the one button because some people just listen in via phone. If you want to break in and ask a question or make a comment, press the one button and we'll put you on the air. You'll be part of the show. You'll be famous like I am, okay? Okay, Bart, thank you very much for joining us on Liberty Talk Radio.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, Joe. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, there's a host of things that subjects that are just sort of hot subjects today. I guess there's no end to it today, you know. And I guess with our president, the new president, I guess he's not so new anymore. He's 9 months old. He adds to the list, by the way, in my opinion. I mean, we can talk about almost anything and have a ball for about a half hour, 45 minutes. But let's start off a little bit about some current events. We noticed that there's an uproar regarding the football players kneeling down during the national anthem. Now, I have some very strong opinions on this, but I'll withhold them for a while. And I'd like your opinion of that and in relationship to who owns the stadium, you know, and what's the job, you know, of the managers of the football staff, of the teams themselves, and what's the responsibility, you know, of the players themselves. Take it away.
Well, you know, my opinion, first of all, is that if your viewers don't know it, the Department of Defense actually pays for most of these patriotic displays, the flyovers, the flag displays, the military marching out for the national anthem. The DoD actually pays about 50 sports teams in the United States, baseball, football, etc. So even if you are a fan of it, you know, keep it in your mind that this is being purposefully shown to you. This is, I mean, if you want to call it propaganda, it's propaganda. It's war propaganda.
I see.
So that's the first thing to keep in mind. The second thing is that you know, this is a First Amendment type issue, right? So if we're talking about whether or not you agree with what the players are doing, you know, it's up to you. I personally, you know, I don't care. But the sad part is that all these players are being put in this position to begin with. And this wasn't the case several years ago. I think up until 2009. Before that, the players all stayed inside their locker rooms while the national anthem was being played. And it was the DoD who actually paid for them. They're paying the NFL to come out and be part of the ceremony. So it's the NFL is actually responsible for this. They're the ones they have actually created this mess in the first place by taking this money, by, you know, creating this nationalist, jingoistic display in the very first place.
Why doesn't the mainstream corporate media make this point? Why do you have to hear it all on alternative radio or alternative television, you never hear the facts. You never hear the facts behind what is going on, from mainstream media. You just get the surface stuff, enough that just sways people to be prejudiced one way or the other. Drives me nuts. Well,
I don't think that's entirely accurate, because the big name newspapers were reporting this. I mean, the Washington Post, I believe, I may be incorrect, but I believe it was the Washington Post that broke this story about 2 years ago. But people don't, one, pay attention. They just don't pay attention. Two, they don't care. They just don't care that this is, wool being pulled over their eyes. And when you boil it all down, people like this stuff. Unfortunately, that is the real issue. That's our biggest problem, is that this is militarism, this is nationalism, and it rings with people. I wrote an article on this. I'm a huge baseball fan. I love the Washington Nationals. They made the playoffs. Go Nationals next week. But I can't stand the militarism. It's right in Washington, D.C., so all the games are in the belly of the beast, and every fourth inning of every game, they have military veterans as guests. They ask the crowd to all stand up and wave their hats to honor the veterans, and every single time, you're talking 40,000 people, standing ovation. And again, people don't realize that this is being paid for by the DOD. This is, lemmings running off the cliff, but they like it. This is what people want, and this is what is being supplied to them, bread and circuses.
Yeah. Well, actually, the DOD is not paying for it. The taxpayer is paying for it. They just collect the money and then divvy it out. And this is one thing that we hear very often on all sorts of news media, how the government is doing something. For example, the aid to Florida and to Texas because of these hellacious hurricanes, and now Puerto Rico, they say the government is providing. I go, time out. No, the government is not providing squat. It's the citizens of North Dakota that are paying for this thing. The citizens of the wonderful state of Oklahoma that I live in. We are the ones that are paying for it. So stop giving credit to somebody in Washington. Give credit to everybody around the United States that had absolutely no say on whether or not they can give. The government should give it, first of all. And I gave money voluntarily, to the organizations that are helping people in Florida and Texas, But it galls me that the government's got to take my money and then spend it.
Oh, absolutely. Well, at the Future of Freedom Foundation, our libertarian take on all issues is first and foremost a moral one. And now, in almost all cases, a libertarian solution, being the moral one, is also, pragmatically speaking, the most efficient one too, just because of the nature of economics and spontaneous order and a free society. But if you take every issue that we talk about, talking about all our warm and fuzzy programs, the very first issue that we will always bring up is the moral one, and that it is all funded by theft. And that's what it is. It's wrong. If my wife was ill and she needed some kind of, medical procedure to help improve her life or maybe even save her life, I don't think there'd be anybody, not one of your viewers, who would condone it if I went and held up my neighbors at gunpoint to get the funds to pay for that. But yet, if the government does the same thing, for instance, aid to Puerto Rico, Houston, or anywhere else there's a disaster, you're taking money from some people and giving it to others. And as noble as the end result may be, it is still theft.
Right. Well, Puerto Rico is an excellent example. It's very difficult to take that position when you see a country has been ravaged by the hurricane as Puerto Rico, where it's just totally annihilated. It's just as bad as if a bombing raid went over and bombed everything out. I guess the question people ask is, well, if the government doesn't step in, what will happen to those people? How would you respond to that?
It's easy. It's charity. It is the natural giving spirit of all humans in general, but particularly American citizens, are extremely giving. And they're a great example of this, if you go back before federal aid existed, was when a hurricane hit Galveston, Texas in the early 20th century. It was devastating. I mean, one, a lot more people died, and two, the infrastructure that they had back then just wasn't as hard as it is now. It was much more susceptible to damage. And it was private industry, and charity that, helped recover. Same thing with the great earthquake in San Francisco and the fires that ensued. It was all private charity. Yeah. So that is my answer, is private charity. There's one, it is the most moral answer to this question, and two, it works.
Right. Well, back, I want to say 1904. I'm not sure the year, but there was a tremendous earthquake where the Mississippi River actually flowed backwards. I mean, went in reverse. And I forgot what year it was, and everything on both sides of the Mississippi totally devastated. There wasn't $1 that the federal government at the time never even hinted on helping out, and yet within 6 months to a year, everyone was back to work. Everything was rebuilt. And today, people say, had the federal government been involved, if that happened today, well, of course, it'd be a larger scale, but had the government get involved, it would take years before they get back to it, if ever. They said they'd be much better off with the government not getting involved. For example, in Puerto Rico, they still have that restriction where everything that coming into a Puerto Rican port has to be on an American ship. So a ship has to stop somewhere, for a foreign ship with supplies, put it on an American ship, American flag ship at least, and then it comes here, and it's holding everything up. Why don't they just allow the ships to come in? It's an emergency, but it's more process over progress.
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, I feel sorry for the people of Puerto Rico, obviously, for the damage was just inflicted on their their society there, but they're a colony, right? They are a colony of the United States, and so they are they unfortunately have to do what the federal government says, and they're beholden to the federal government, and they are completely constricted by regulation. So one is this perfect example of the shipping that would make their life better. I do believe I read that President Trump recently lifted that ban by executive decree. That's another question, completely entirely whether or not that's constitutional or not. But he did. But also the minimum wage down there. I'm sure zoning restrictions. If you lifted all of those restrictions, I'm sure you would see Puerto Rico recover in no time. But they are beholden to the federal government, and I fear that it is going to take a long time for that, much longer than would be necessary for that island to recover.
I never understood I was in Puerto Rico recently, and I never understood the minimum wage in Puerto Rico. Their basic standard of living is like 1/3 of what Mississippi is, and yet they have the same minimum wage, as Oklahoma. It doesn't fit. The shoe doesn't fit. I mean, why did they impose that restriction, that employment restriction in Puerto Rico? Why did we care at that point? I mean, if it was operating okay the way it was, let the free market exist in Puerto Rico. The starting salaries will equalize according to their economy, and things will be productive.
Well, that's the way it should be everywhere, right? In areas where the prevailing wage is above the minimum wage, and Washington D.C. is a good example. You have a much more efficient market. I mean, you can't get a babysitter in the D.C. area for minimum wage. And so the market, at least in that respect, it operates pretty efficiently. But you go and when you go to an economy where the basic inputs of labor, a guy going to flip burgers will only bring you $3 worth of value in your local economy, why on earth would anybody want to go and hire somebody like that and pay him $8 an hour? It's just a losing proposition. So why they did in Puerto Rico, I don't know the local politics there. If I had to guess, I would say that labor unions were probably involved, but I don't know.
Yeah. Well, we seem to want to reform everything. We never get rid of anything, and whenever we reform something, it seems that all we do is create another problem. Government could never eliminate programs. I mean, totally eliminate them. They always seem to hide them under another organization, another department, or maybe they may retitle them so they fit someplace else. At what point? Right now we're approaching $21 trillion with a T, in current year's debt. I had Professor Kotlakoff here like a couple of weeks ago. He said the real debt, long-term and short-term debt, is approaching $225 trillion. That's more than my Sally, my booking agent, spends, at Dillard's in one day.
That's scary.
Yeah, it's scary. I tell you. This is not sustainable. We are a bankrupt nation. Now we have no debt ceiling. The sky's the limit. Isn't anyone in Washington saying you can't do this, and if you continue to do this, we're going to go the same way of Britain, we're going to go the same way as the Soviet Union, and if you want to go back to the Roman Empire, go back to the Roman... I mean, we can name probably 1,000 empires in the past couple of thousand years that went the same way. Why do we persist on doing the same thing, expecting a different result?
There's not that many people who care, for one. There are very few politicians in D.C. who, take their fiscal, conservative credentials very seriously. Most programs benefit somebody, all right? So if you're going to reform it, have it benefit somebody else. It's hard for a politician to stay in D.C. if he's not going to play that game. A recent example that I think really exemplifies this is the Export-Import Bank. I'm sure you must be familiar with that, where they fund American companies overseas to help exports. And there's really people call it Boeing's bank, right? Boeing benefits enormously from it, sending planes overseas, and it is a blatant form of corporatism. I mean, taking our money, right, taxpayer money, sending it over to big corporations and just basically depositing it in their bank account. People are aware of this. Op-eds across papers throughout the United States have all, discussed about how bad this is, how we need to eliminate it. Everybody was in pretty much total agreement. At least there was somewhat of a political consensus that we needed to get rid of this, and yet it still trudges on. The worse, we cannot even get the political wherewithal to eliminate them. So I'm not very, I don't have a good view in the long term of eliminating any federal programs whatsoever. I'm afraid that, like most empires, like you were just referring to, it's going to take a major calamity for anything to ever get done. It's like collapse of the dollar or something worse.
Yeah, but aren't we really heading there?
Absolutely.
Bureaucracy is getting worse. Everything's getting more expensive. They just hide all the expenses. They hide all the hidden expenses. I mean, everything is, nothing goes away that cost. But yet people, and many people that I have on my program that are in the higher income areas, multimillionaires to billionaires, what's really interesting is most of them are Americans not living in the United States anymore. They know better.
Oh, sure. I don't know where it ends. This inflationary scheme just keeps on going on. It's certainly unsustainable. I think if we ever get to the point where foreigners, particularly the Chinese government in particular, lose faith in our fiat money system, you're going to see some really horrible, ugly times in this country. Yeah. But at the same time, I bet the Export-Import Bank doesn't do too well after that happens.
I read an interesting article. I'm not sure if Jacob Hornberger himself wrote this. I'm not sure who the author was, but it was how to resolve the situation in North Korea. And basically it said, withdraw all our troops, close all our bases, go to radio silence, don't say anything, let North Korea do what North Korea does and South Korea do what South Korea does, get out of Japan altogether, remove all our troops get home. This would eventually force South Korea and North Korea to the negotiating table without the big boys in the background, nudging them on or dictating what they should say or do. And he said eventually, because it was a civil war to start off with that we decided to get involved in as a civil war, which we should have stayed out of altogether after World War II, and of course, which never got resolved. And I sort of, after reading that, I said, that sounds logical to me. But that's dangerous because a lot of things sound logical to me that no one does. So I've got to be the insane person. What say you about that?
Oh, absolutely. That was an article by Jacob Hornberger, which you can find on our website at fff.org. But we call for the withdrawal of troops from all foreign bases. North Korea is a prime example. We've been there for 60 some odd years now. It's just it's just a fire waiting to happen. There's no reason for us to be there. We have absolutely no interest. Nobody over there is keeping us safe. Absolutely, we should withdraw from South Korea. All of our troops, bring them all home, but bring them home from all countries all over the world.
Right.
It's been a little while since I've read the statistics, but we have, as last I remember, bases in over 140 countries,
right,
all over the world, 800 some odd bases, if I recall correctly. Why? It makes no sense whatsoever. There's no national security interest, and it does nothing but upset people in other countries. If we want enemies, this is certainly the best way to create them.
Yeah. The response that I get when I mention that is that, but we're the policemen of the world. I go, who elected us? They said, well, if we don't do it, who will? I said, no one. I mean, everyone would police their own country. No one can give me an explanation of what policemen of the world means. I mean, to me, it's so illogical, and most people think it's a perfectly logical position to take.
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, another word for policemen of the world to me is bully, right? I mean, people do what we want them to do. Now, I'm not sure I agree with you that if we were to withdraw all of our troops, that there would be no other policemen of the world. I mean, maybe China or Russia. Let's just assume that Russia or China started, swinging their swords a little heavier than they do now. So what? I mean, that is the nature of the world. But it doesn't affect us,
right,
and that's I've got no problem with, defending our country, but going out and telling other countries, overthrowing other governments, subverting their systems of government, supporting puppet dictators in Egypt and Saudi Arabia, and it's not a system of liberty. It is not what a free people should be doing. It's not the example we should be setting. Actually, I would recommend a good book on this. Stephen Kinzer just came out with called True Flag, and it's about the foreign policy debate that ensued in 1898 when the Spanish-American War broke out. And there are a lot of Americans who saw this happening and did not like it, knew what it meant, that a free people, should not have colonies, should not be going in search of monsters to destroy, as John Quincy Adams said. So I'd highly recommend that book.
Yeah, and very few people realize that we're instrumental in literally destroying Chile. We've been in Argentina, most South American countries. We have a tremendous amount of influence in some of the, because of some of the dictators that are there, et cetera. And yet we spend taxpayer money. I mean, we are working to support this military, this international military-industrial complex, and then when we send, here's my problem. Some young man graduates high school, doesn't know what to do. He goes in the Army. We train him to kill. Then we send him over to a place like Afghanistan to kill people. He comes back. His mind is all messed up because he knows he killed innocent people, but were forced to under the circumstances, and then his life is destroyed. And then we tell him, thank you for your service. I mean, is that not a platform for total insanity?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I can't even tell you the number of young people I've talked to who were contemplating going into the service, and I've done my best to talk them out of it. But I got to be honest with you. It's discouraging because these people that I've talked to, and I'm talking 17-year-old kids,
right.
They have no grasp whatsoever of what they're getting into. All they know is what they see on the television and how grand the Army is. Going to see the world is what one big thing that one big reason that's given, and going to see the world and going and getting an education. So it's a career. I never really hear anything about one supporting our way of life or defending our freedoms. That's never a reason given. It's a career. It's a way to see the world. It's a way to get some training. And that's really, if you're thinking on those terms, when you're going to join an organization that by its very nature is designed to kill, you've got a really bad problem to deal with. That's the root of the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, and we've been educated that way, and on television here all the time, someone says, "Well, I served four assignments in Afghanistan," and the next thing out of the person, "Thank you for your service." I go, "What service? What did he serve? He didn't serve me. He went there and he hopefully didn't kill, didn't die, didn't get injured or come back." And a lot of guys come back so goofy they're dysfunctional, and there's a reason for it because they don't know why they're there. They're under tremendous pressure and they break after a while. And yet we continue this mantra, "Thank you for your service." What service? To whom? For what reason? And no one wants to answer the question.
Well, I mean, it's the same thing as the baseball game. You got 40,000 people waving their hats for the veterans. Of course, kids. There's the kids who are attending that baseball game see an entire stadium full of people, giving adulation to these veterans. And that makes them think that this is an honorable thing. That's their service. The flag is waving, the people are cheering, and that is the service. You're sacrificing, you're putting yourself in harm's way for our country. And unfortunately, that's indoctrination. And it's hard to convince both the people going into the military that it's not right, and it's hard to convince your average American citizen that they're not serving us.
Yeah, and the school system, of course, are run by the government. So the government version of these wars and how we got into these wars is the government version. It is not what really happened, but it's the one that makes us look like the good guy with the white hat going there saving the world.
Oh, sure.
When in fact we sometimes have initiated certain actions that created an incident that forced us to go into the war, but that's never mentioned. I remember reading a book, I'm not sure if you're familiar with, I forgot the author's name, it says Day of Deceit. It was about how we knew well in advance that the Japanese were going to attack Pearl Harbor, and it's all documentation. There's verbiage in it, but everything that is said is backed by half of the book is documentation, the actual government documents. That has an actual photo of it, with the government stamp on it, whatever. And everything that's said, if there's only one point in the book that I read where he makes a statement, he says, "I do not have a document to back this up." So everything he says is backed up by a government document. But yet we don't learn that. we just learn what the government wants us to hear. And so we graduate school, we start believing that everything the government says is true, everything we do is for altruistic reasons, and we're here to save the world. And since we're the world's policemen, we're the good guys.
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, why? What incentive does a public education system have to tell you how bad it is, right? So it's unsurprising. It's why I homeschool my children, right? But no, I mean, if you go to school, and I even went to private school, and I didn't hear. You're not going to hear any alternative, theories about these things. Let's take the Pearl Harbor, for example. Let's not assume it's true, but there might be good evidence to, explore the possibility. What incentive does a public school textbook have to say, this is an avenue that some historians think might be true? You're not going to see it. So I never learned. I'm assuming you didn't learn that, that Pearl Harbor may have been, they may have known about it. Gulf of Tonkin, the USS Maine, for that matter. No, there's a major problem with public education. And getting back to our original point too, it's also our tax dollars that are paying for this as well. So it's our tax dollars paying for this type of indoctrination.
Yeah. Now, I had Rick Rule on the program about a week ago, and I asked him this question, and he gave the same answer that I gave when I was asked the question, and that was, is Donald Trump, President Trump, a good businessman? Right? And I'm going to ask you that question. Do you think Donald Trump is a good businessman?
Well, I will have to admit that that's outside of my bailiwick.
Okay.
I honestly
I'll
don't know.
withdraw the question then. Let me withdraw the question, okay? Well, his answer was the same as mine. He's a good wheeler dealer, but he sucks as a businessman because I'm a businessman, and as a businessman, if someone asks me to invest in something, I say, fine, let me see your source and disposition of funds, your profit and loss statements, et cetera, I'll look at it and I'll let you know. And he doesn't do that. He spends money that doesn't exist and somehow thinks it's going to evolve. I think he's just a wheeler dealer, and people who say that he's a successful businessman, well, depending on how you calculate the number of times he filed bankruptcy, it's either 4 or 6 times, depending on if you want to separate. There's 2 that you can separate to separate bankruptcies. Some people say 6 times. I would say he beats me out there. So he must, in the bankruptcy department, he beats me out all the way. Now, being a great businessman that he is, does he not understand that we may be approaching that cliff where we fall off and we can't pay our bills anymore, that things are getting worse, that we cannot afford. We never pay our bills because all we do is print more money to pay the bills. So we basically, in effect, default every year because we never pay our bills with money we make. We pay our bills with money that we create, that creating inflation and more money in circulation. Does he not know that there's got to be a come to Jesus meeting here, that there's sooner or later we're going to run out? And do you see this day coming, or you think we can go on forever? Well,
it's definitely going to come someday. I mean, it's unsustainable. Whether or not Donald Trump knows about it, you would have to think so. I mean, it's basic economics, and whether or not he's a good businessman or not, I mean, anybody who knows anything about finance knows that this is not sustainable. But I don't lay this at the feet of Donald Trump. I mean, he's powerless here. The only thing he can do is sign legislation, right? This lays at the feet of our Congress, and they're the real cowards here. They're the ones who really are to blame, for this mess that we're in.
Yeah. Well, many years ago, I read an article that talked about how the CIA and that group of people hate when the President travels, because they says every time the president, this was many years ago, every time the president steps foot out of the White House, off the grounds, etc., it cost immediately $1 million because of all the preparation and all the things they have to do. And I'm sure it's much higher now. Now, this president has traveled more than any other president. And you would think, I mean, I'm sorry for being so logical, but no, really, it just annoys the hell out of me where, we have a problem. Obviously, everyone knows what happened in Puerto Rico. It doesn't literally exist as a country, as a nation anymore, or country anymore, or whatever they want to call it. And yet, he has to travel to Puerto Rico. Well, how about saving that $2-3 million, having him go down and take that money for food or for clothing or for energy or for something, rather than him traveling and making a scene that he is unnecessary. He's not going to be doing anything other than costing a couple of $1 million. He did the same thing in Florida. He did the same thing in Texas. I mean, we're talking millions and millions of dollars that can be saving lives.
Well, it's populism 101, right? It looks good, right? I am the president who cares. And two, if he didn't do it, the political price to pay would be enormous. That's why he does it. There's no fiscal reason for it, right? I mean, you're absolutely correct. You are completely logical. It is a waste of money. And the money would be better spent rather than sending food down there. How about paying off a little bit of that $21 trillion debt that we have? That's what we should be doing. But no, it's politics 101. It's populism. And honestly, it would be a steep price to pay for a president who doesn't go down there in these days. I mean, what natural disaster can you think of in the last 20 years that Obama or Bush or Clinton or Bush before him didn't go visit too?
I agree. Yeah, I'm not playing the Democrat-Republican card at all. I mean, I think they're all wrong. None of them are right when they do that, and they have to level with people, just like when Trump was running for president, he criticized all the bombing in Syria and the troops in Afghanistan. Then becomes president and becomes a priority to do that. And you know what? We have very short memories. We want to forget what he said and the reason why he got elected. Then when he does exactly the opposite of what he said and the reason why he got elected, everyone applauds him. I think I'm losing my mind. I mean, obviously, because I see this and I say, America, wake up. But America must be asleep. I don't understand this at all. I'm very frustrated with the United States. And quite frankly, I've always been concerned about our government. I've never liked our political order at all. But this is the very first time that I'm actually quite scared.
Well, I am too. I mean, not to scare your viewers or anything, but it's a scary scene right now, right? I mean, we're at a point now where the government really has unlimited power. I mean, that's where we are. I mean, our government, we're talking about, to be honest with you, everything we've been talking about is really pales in comparison to what our government can really do. We're talking about inflation and our president flying around but I mean, when you think about it, our government has the power to capture us, kidnap us, bomb us, torture us, detain us indefinitely, surveil us. I mean, it is doing all these things now, and you're talking about a citizenry that has a short memory. I mean, all this stuff came to light with Snowden's revelations, 4 years ago now? I'm not even sure what it is, but recently. Nobody cares anymore, and that is what's truly scary. People don't care. And we have this monster on our hands that really is getting out of control. Like George Washington said, it's fire, and the fire has gotten out of the fireplace, and nobody seems to care to want to stomp it out.
Yeah, there was one area that I thought Trump would take the bull by the horns and finally make a change, and that's the war on drugs. I mean, we all know that, people don't stand on street corners selling aspirin because you can buy, for $1.29 at the discount store you can buy a bottle of 200 aspirin, and there's no money in it. But if they made aspirin illegal, all of a sudden people would be pushing aspirin on street corners because it would be, $5 or $10 an aspirin. The same holds true. Portugal recently, in the past couple of years, made drugs legal. Their drug use went down, rehabilitation's up, law enforcement's not having the problems it had before, drugs is not as big a problem as it had before. All positive responses from eliminating the war on drugs. Why don't we take lessons from that, or is the government being financed by the war on drugs?
Well, I don't know about that, but before the war on terrorism really got cranked up, I mean, our biggest concern was the war on drugs because of all the problems that it created. Getting back to principles, it's a violation of individual liberty. People should be able to put anything they want in their bodies, right? As long as I'm not hurting you, what business of it is yours? I should be able to do what I want. But then the incentives are all messed up too. One, you're creating a criminal class out of peaceful citizens. You're throwing all these people in jail for nonviolent crimes. And then you're creating a black market, like you were just referring to with aspirin. Here you have, a black market in anything is going to do two things for you. It's going to create violence, right? Because the people who are, serving this black market have no recourse to the court system, right? If the guy, has defrauded you or your customers, your only recourse is violence. Can't take them to court. And then the second thing it does is that the quality of the product is unverifiable. So you have, right now we have this massive opioid problem right now. And one of the biggest problems with it, one is obviously very addictive. So you got a really bad addiction problem. But a huge proportion of the people who are dying of overdoses with these is because the drugs that they're taking are adulterated with some fentanyl is a very popular thing to cut it with. I think it's 100 times more powerful than heroin and cheap. So, if drugs were legal, this would not be happening. One, you wouldn't have all these people in jail. And of course, people wouldn't be having their rights violated, and you wouldn't have people dropping like flies because they, at least at a minimum, they would know what they were putting in their bodies. People are always going to get hurt. You still have people who die from alcohol use, right? But it's nothing like this, right? So, why it is still continuing to go on, I think it's entropy, but that said, it's one of the areas where it's one of the few bright spots in the libertarian world where I think progress has actually been made. I think people are seeing it, not just libertarians and not just people who are your average, political participants. I think Joe Sixpack here is finally starting to see the light on this because everybody knows somebody who has either, died or is in jail or has had problems. And also it's been going on for 40 years now. So, right. And nothing's happened. And then we have examples of legalization working. Your example of Portugal is fantastic. Over there, just every single measure that you can think of, it has been a grand slam success over there. And then look at Washington State, look at Colorado, where all these predictions of doom and gloom when they legalize marijuana just have not come true. And now the legislators over there are just giddy with all the tax dollars that they're getting. So I think that if we were to have hope in any one area of policy, this is it. I think that we've got a chance to, if not full legalization, which is really the goal, at a minimum decriminalization, and I would take that right now.
Yeah, I think our elected officials know this. Then one thing, they're not stupid. They know where the money is though, and there's no money in legalization for them. But there is money by having wars. We're a peace-loving nation that has a war on drugs, a war on poverty, a war on education. You name it, we have a war, but we're a peace-loving nation. It's so contradictory. Everything that we do is contradictory. If I was a kid growing up, I would be goofball altogether. I'm a goofball now, and I'm an old goofball. I'd be a young goofball, but much worse than I am now. And I have someone here writing you wrote a question down?
No.
You wrote a comment?
No.
You just said you had a comment for me? Give it to me. Let me see.
Fox News talked about the...
Fox News Import Bank?
No.
What?
When you were talking about early in the show. Something you were talking about early in the show. Oh, the football players and the DOD providing money to the NFL.
Oh, okay.
Fox News did have a story on
they
that,
did have
and
a
then
story.
they mentioned
Okay.
it.
All right.
So I just wanted to put it a plug for Fox.
So you're saying they recently talked about that?
Yes, they did. They actually did. I learned a lot there.
She's a neocon, you know.
Am I?
Yeah,
What is
she's
that?
a neocon. You know,
Define
You
that.
have to have everybody represented here.
If we nuked West Virginia, she would be fine with that, you know,
Sure,
because
yeah.
West Virginia's really a bad
No.
place to be. Anyway, but
West Virginia makes Arkansas look good.
Yeah, that's
so
right. Okay.
that's why we like
Yeah,
West
okay.
Virginia.
all right, Bart.
Sorry.
We've taken more than our allotted time. I want to thank you so much for being
It's
on the
been
program. Please do me. Let me give you the last minute or so, just if you want to wrap things up or summarize or. Tell me you'll never come back on the program again. Or whatever.
Well, I would love to come back. So thank you. It's a pleasure. But I would say to the listeners, your viewers, check us out. Check out the Future of Freedom Foundation, FFF.org, because what we represent is a truly free society. So as you can tell from what we're talking about here, what we advocate is a society where everybody is allowed to do whatever they want as long as you're not violating the rights of somebody else.
Right.
We are for uncompromising libertarianism, and that means we're not calling for reform, we're calling for abolishing things. So if you want to abolish things like we do, come and check us out.
Yeah, I didn't mention that my wife and I are enthusiastic financial supporters of the Future Freedom Foundation, have been for many, many years, and hope to as long as we can do so. Okay, Bart, thank you so much for being on our program. We hope you will accept that invitation to return at a later date.
No, I had a great time, Joe. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Folks, this is the end of today's program. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the financial support, and we'd like to thank you for listening in. You can further the cause of liberty by recommending this program to your friends, and let us hear from you. Our email address is comments@libertytalkradio.com. Remember, as my wife would say, you're either allowing your liberties to be taken away or you're striving to protect them. Unfortunately, there is no middle ground. Until next time, this is Joe Cristiano. You've been listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Stay well. Stay tuned.